Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us this evening for the closing night film of the 29th Woods Hole Film Festival. My name is Judy Laster. I am the founder and director of the Woods Hole Film Festival. Traditionally, the Woods Hole Film Festival takes place each summer from the last Saturday of July through the first Saturday of August, right here in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, where I'm located. This year, in the middle of March, it became clear that it was going to be a challenge to have a live and in-person multi-day event with thousands of people running up and down the streets, getting cut behind the Woods Hole drawbridge, running to a screening. So we very quickly had to pivot being the word of the pandemic, to create another way for the film festival to present 187 films that we've had in our 29th edition. So we spent the last 2.5 months developing and creating the first virtual edition of the Woods Hole Film Festival. It's been an incredible 8 days. As I mentioned, we've screened 187 films. We've had filmmakers with us from all over the world. We've had live filmmaker chats and Q&As, panel discussions, workshops, music, general fun, and so much more over this 8 days. However, it does not take the place of an in-person event. So we hope that next year for the 30th, we'll all be right back here in Woods Hole. And if you can't join us in Woods Hole, we'll be virtual as well. So generally, I just want to give everyone a few housekeeping rules. But first, I'd like to say that because we have so many great films, we had a lot of requests for people to have more time to see them. So we are extending access to the streaming platform until Monday, August 3rd at midnight. Every film in the festival is eligible for an audience award. So if you have not voted on films, please vote. Our slogan is vote early, vote often, but only one vote counts. So you have until Monday at midnight. If you have seen a film and haven't voted on it, you can go back into the platform and do that. The other thing is that we will be giving the awards on Sunday, August 16th. We'll be doing that by live streaming them on Facebook, and we will also announce them on our website if you don't have a chance to join us then. So if you're in the audience, I would like to invite you to participate after we have about 20 to 25 minutes of discussion by typing your questions into the Q&A. I will be the person who will then relay them to this incredible array of distinguished guests. It's possible we may not get to all of them, but we will try as much as we can. I also would like to say that this festival could not happen without the support of our sponsors, our donors, our filmmakers, and you, our audience. So thank you so much for being here. So without further ado, I'm gonna open it up to Ben Rekhi to come in. I don't see you, Ben. I'm sure you're here somewhere. Introduce Ben Rekhi. This is the world premiere of the Reunited States. Ben, congratulations. We're so thrilled that you gave us the honor of launching this film and putting it out into the world where we know it will be seen broadly and hopefully create very meaningful change. Ben, I'm gonna open it up to you to introduce everyone else with us too.
Yeah, thanks so much, Judy, and to the whole Woods Hole team for having us. We couldn't be more honored. This is a film we've been working on for 2 years. I've traveled to 20 different states across the country and 4 major storylines, and people here with us tonight that were gracious enough to allow us into their world to follow them. So thank you guys as well. Yeah, this film, we never could have imagined how the world that it would come into and how the ground shifted beneath all of our feet in the past 6 months. Obviously with the pandemic and the economic fallout, and then George Floyd and the social unrest that we've all experienced and been a part of. And so the film has themes that, Mark Gerzon, the author of the book, The Reunited States, has been exploring and working in this transpartisan space for the past 30 years. Mark and I met early in the process of making the film. I guess everyone who's here has seen the film, so these faces are familiar to you, and so we might not need as many introductions as normal. But what we can kind of do is just go around and, Mark, I think it would be good to start with you because, what's not in the film is how you came to this world of bridge building and what in your life led you to this. And you always told a little bit about the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, as being sort of the beginning of this polarization in our country. So, Mark, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey? Oops, you're on mute, Mark. Oh, yeah, he took it off and he's still on mute. It's still not working. We might have to do some troubleshooting here. Well, in the meantime, yeah, we'll kick it over. I guess the other big catalyst for this story was Susan Bro, and when I saw her speak at an event in DC, and was just really moved, that she had been through this tragedy and had come out the other side, being able to talk with such clarity about the need for conversations and working through difficult conversations to avoid further violence from happening. And it took a little convincing at first to get Susan on board. But I guess, Susan, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing with the Heather Heyer Foundation? And I guess we're going on almost 3 years now. It's August 1st. And the August 12th was when this all happened. But can you just in a nutshell talk about what the Heather Heyer Foundation is and what drives you now in your work?
We originally filed papers with the IRS only 9 days after Heather was murdered. We formed the foundation with money that was sent in through all sorts of venues to us in small amounts. People would send me a card with $10, $20 or something, and I was very touched, but I said, this money is not for the family. There had already been a GoFundMe and that had closed. So we used that money to start the Heather Heyer Foundation as a scholarship organization. Then the Ellen Show had Shutterfly give us $50,000. So we said, well, maybe we should set our sights a little higher than just 2 scholarships. So we have continued to give scholarships, continued to expand. Over the last 3 years, we've given a little over $20,000 in scholarships, and plan to continue that. We had a good investment team, and so we survived the pandemic, and donations have continued to come in. So we're going to give another $8,000 this coming year, and that will be on our website on October 1 as to what scholarships and who is eligible. And I can tell you that at times it's hard for me to stay impartial with difficult conversations. And actually doing the promo for this film, I've had to think about, okay, how are you talking now? Are you mediating now? Are you getting a little tonal there? So I'm having to calm myself down, getting back to being able to have difficult conversations.
And just to pick up on that, it's been such an emotional time the past few years for a lot of people, just, politically, either, people who are for or against the president. But for you who had been through such a, emotional period in your life, how did you come out and talk with such kind of clarity about these issues that resonated with people?
Well, I was always a school teacher, and honestly, if you've ever taught 4th grade, it's very much like dealing with adults. There's not a lot of difference. You take in the information, you think about how it's going to make the most sense coming back out, and then you relay that information in a way that makes sense to people, and that's what I still try to do. To me, my daughter's death was a personal tragedy, but it put me in a position where people wanted to hear what I had to say, and it would have been a waste to not use that platform to elevate the causes that she died for. It would have been a waste to use that that platform for further polarization. So I'm trying to use that to assist in a variety of ways and to help people realize that they are capable of taking action and they are responsible to take action in a positive, nonviolent way.
Wow. Yeah, it's Susan and I have talked about this, but I feel like part of the reason, you've been able to cut through the clutter and a lot of like media firestorm is just, there's not a lot of voices of reason out there. And, you've been able to articulate what's in a lot of people's hearts. And so we thank you for it and for letting us into your world to be along for the ride with this film.
Thank you. I'm going to try to maintain that reasonable status though.
It's hard. And that's one of the big things that we've, I've all learned is that, bridge building or trying to overcome divisions is not easy work. It's a messy business, and, it's kind of 2 steps forward and 1 step back a lot of the time. And so I've definitely put my foot in my mouth a lot in this journey. But Mark, are you back with us? This might be a good place to bring you into the conversation.
I hope my audio is working this time.
Yes. So, yes, Mark, if you can kind of tell us at a bird's eye view, just the beginning of your journey and what brought you to this work.
Well, you mentioned the Cold War earlier on. What I noticed was that during the Cold War, for those of the folks who were listening and watching who are old enough to remember, there was a lot of hatred focused on the Soviet Union, enormous amount of hatred, much stronger and more powerful hatred than we have for any external enemy today. And I noticed, I did a lot of work trying to build bridges between the US and the USSR. And I noticed when that enmity ended, when the Cold War ended, and Reagan said, tear down this wall, and the Berlin Wall came down, we lost an enemy. And I could feel the energy in America shift in the late 80s and early 90s. I could just feel it shift. It was almost like all that enemy energy had to find some place to land. So I worked in communities around the United States and noticed in those communities around the United States a growing intensity of local conflict. And that led to my working with Congress, and I experienced it there. So for me, the 90s was the turning point. And a lot of historians say that the 90s were the time when the Democrats and Republicans finally had to learn to work together in the House of Representatives. They hadn't for 40 years. The Democrats had been running the House of Representatives for 40 years. In the 90s, they had to figure out, oh my gosh, we have to work together. And they didn't know how. And they still don't know how. And that's, I think, why this film is important, and what the work of each of the people on the screen is important, is that we did not know how to work together across differences at the highest level. We knew how to have an elite that made decisions in country clubs and in quiet, wood-paneled rooms. But we did not know how to have a democracy in which everybody participated and worked through our differences. And so what Susan just said was a beautiful, and the way Susan has held her leadership role is a beautiful example of how one needs to conduct oneself in a democracy when there are different points of view. And so for me, the excitement about this film and what each of the main characters in the film do, who are all on the screen here, what each of these folks do, the Levertons and Greg and Stephen, they're all basically saying, how do we build bridges across differences and become stronger in the process? That was the vision of the United States originally. We've never lived up to it, and I think now we have a chance, and I think your film is going to help galvanize that civic energy. That's my hope, Ben.
Yeah, no, you said something there that really struck me, which is, most of us don't know how to resolve those differences in our own lives, and we, everyone's been affected by this polarization, whether it's, friends or family or coworkers. Like, this is deeply personal for everyone in this country, and most of us are not equipped with the tools to have those conversations. And we kind of think that if we're right, we're gonna fight our way through a conversation, and it's that willingness to agree to disagree has been lost. Greg, I wanted to bring it to you for a moment, just, thinking about what Mark was saying. There's, it sort of seems like we have Stockholm syndrome, like it's binary choices, like, red or blue, and life doesn't always, isn't black and white like that. And so a lot of your journey has been to show people another way. And what obligation do each of us have in terms of like, this kind of reform that you're pushing for?
Well, what I really have come to conclude, and I think this probably comes through pretty clearly in the movie, is that the two-party system is irreparably broken. And I know there's a lot of people doing a lot of very good work to try to create what I call higher functioning Democrats and Republicans in terms of our leaders. People who are able to work across the aisle, compromise. Stephen is certainly working on that very clearly with what he's doing with Millennial Action. I've taken a different approach to it. My belief, and I think everybody here probably agrees, is that Washington is broken. And if we don't get Washington back into the business of solving problems, our status in the world, our standard of living, and the very existence of the middle class in America is at risk. And so for me, the imperative here is to create a third force in our politics, with the belief that third force, like it does in other countries where they have parliamentary democracies and multi-party democracies, that third force can be a moderating force that ultimately gets us back in the business of solving problems, which is really where I think we have to get to. And I know you mentioned the president earlier in your comments, and clearly he's a very polarizing figure. He forces binary choices, so people are either with him or against him. What I would argue is he is the byproduct of a two-party system that has so utterly failed the American people that they went looking for an alternative. If the two-party system were functioning properly, there wouldn't be any oxygen in the room for someone who so clearly wanted to tear it down. And so, ultimately my goal is to create a third force in our politics with the belief that that's really the only way we're going to bridge this divide. Now, with that said, I hope I'm wrong. And I hope all of the well-intentioned activities of a lot of people that I know and like and respect ultimately end up prevailing, and we find ourselves in a situation where the parties get their acts together and start solving problems and genuinely representing the interests of the American people.
Yeah, this idea of declaring our independence and, each of us kind of saying we shouldn't be voting against what we don't like, but rather for what we do want, is something that seems so far away now, because it's just, there's so much fear involved of what would happen if the other side wins. But
yeah. It's very frustrating, because I think we are at a point right now where people don't generally vote for what they aspire to, candidates that inspire them, what they want. They vote against candidates they hate and they fear. And ultimately what that does is lets us all down. We end up getting a government that doesn't deliver the kind of results it needs to deliver for people.
Yeah, I think, Stephen, this would be a good place to bring it over to you. A lot of people that are working in this, bridge building space or reuniting space often work on an issue that they're passionate about, and then once it gets into the system, see how dysfunctional the system is, and that becomes the bigger problem. Can you talk a little bit about your beginnings and what made you think you could form the alliances that you have in a time that was so hyperpolarized?
Yeah, well, thanks, Ben, and thanks, Judy, for hosting us, and we hope to come out to Cape Cod next year. But in the meantime, welcome to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and hope to have you all here in person. I missed what you said, Judy.
I said, just cure the virus and you'll be here.
Exactly. We're working on that in over here at my apartment. So again, Ben, very honored to be part of the movie, and the leap of faith that we took back in 2013 was based on one premise that, by investing in the next generation of leaders, we can achieve this step change that we're looking for in politics. One way I often talk about is when you're driving a car, you might be able to get to the fourth gear or fifth gear under the normal circumstances, but I think we need people to find a sixth gear. And that sixth gear is rooted in the need for love and empathy, justice, and reconciliation. And when we started off, we didn't know that people would answer the call to transcend their own self-interest or their own partisan interest But my co-founders and I, we read the founding documents of this country, and we realized that in the course of human history, this experiment we have around self-governance with a diverse democracy is so revolutionary, and we thought it was important enough to try. This is an important mission, and that's obviously why we're all here. And the good news, Ben, is that people did respond to that call. When I was out in DC starting to form this caucus of millennials, we'd never started a caucus before. I still remember talking with some of the people who had started caucuses, and I said, how do you start one of these? And I just recently was reconnecting with a friend of mine who made the first introduction we had, on Capitol Hill. And here's the thing, like, we didn't have the incentives that you would traditionally think you would need in politics. We didn't have stature. We didn't have money. We didn't have a lot of the things that you think you need to shake in front of politicians to get them to change their behavior. What we did have was conviction and a mission and a call to action. And people did respond to that. And we ended up recruiting now today over 1,500 elected officials across the country and utilizing, this methodology. It has led to real results. A big theme in this movie is how our country reckons with race. And just recently, our chapter in Mississippi dealt with the issue of race head on in trying to change the state flag, which has had this Confederate emblem on it. And our caucus said that this is not what the future of Mississippi should look like. They led the way to build a cross-partisan coalition to change the flag. And I was recently interviewing our co-chair down there, who's in the film briefly. His name's Representative Jeremy Anderson. He was at the summit that's portrayed in the film. And I asked him, how did you build bridges across party lines, across racial lines, to achieve that consensus to change the state flag, especially when it hadn't been done when we first went to Mississippi in 2017. It tried and wasn't working. And the key thing was that they reached out with an open mind, an open heart, and with empathy. And they didn't try to write people off. They sought to bring people in. And through that methodology, they built this powerful coalition. And that change of the state flag was signed into law by the Republican governor down there. So I think what people need to see, as Mark referenced earlier, is that building bridges can lead us to not only a better place, but a stronger place. And that's what we're dedicated to with Millennial Action Project.
It's really exciting. I didn't know that most recent update about the Confederate flag or about the state flag. That's really that's huge. One of the things you said to me when we were making the film that didn't make it into the film is, people are so fixated on national politics, but at the state level is really where there's a lot of exciting things happening and action and policies being passed left and right. And I didn't know it was up to 1,500 people in the future caucus now across the country.
Yeah, with 1,500 in state legislatures and in Congress. And to your point about the state level work, I can say this as someone who leads an organization working both federally and at the state level. For people who are watching and wondering, how do you get involved? On a per dollar per minute basis, there's just more return at the state level. You see more action. And so often it doesn't get all the headlines, but you can achieve a lot at the state level. And when there's a good model, there are groups like ours and there are others out there that can help to scale up good solutions across the country. And a great example of that was gerrymandering reform in Ohio. People said that wouldn't be possible. It's too partisan. Working with our Republican co-chair there, he helped us transcend politics and partisanship on that issue. And when that passed, and now we're able to spread that and share those insights of, hey, how did that happen when everyone said that isn't possible, to other states? Or another big one is around safe voting this year and trying to get absentee ballots and absentee ballot requests sent out to registered voters. We got that done in Wisconsin, in Ohio, in Iowa, and people said that wouldn't be possible. So what we can do is try and get these wins at the state level. People engaging at that level is hugely productive, and then it can spread pretty quickly, even faster than you might think.
Yeah, it's part of what inspired this film and your story in particular was this idea that all we hear about is divisive politics, and we don't really hear these stories of when things actually there's consensus and positive policy outcomes from that. And the fact that you have this method of people under 40 and that a key part of this is that it has to be bipartisan. There has to be Republicans and Democrats. Most caucuses are one or the other. and that they can come up with these out of the box ideas and bring it back to the broader coalitions and get it passed is like this kind of amazing catalyst. So thank you, Stephen. And then, we talked about race. You brought that up there, and obviously that's a big part of the film and the national conversation, always ongoing. And, David and Aaron, I feel just, incredibly humbled that you allowed us in to follow your story, because I think, the idea that race, racial issues, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily think that race is as much of an issue anymore, or that the journey of discovering our own blind spots in this, wherever we are on the journey, is something that is up to each of us to do. And so, you had some quotes in the film about kind of thinking that racism had been over, and then seeing that that wasn't the case. What was that like going through that journey, and where are you on the journey now?
Yeah, we really assumed, I think, like a lot of especially conservative white Americans, that race was not a thing anymore. We had such great victories in the 60s with the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, and just kind of that capstone of electing the nation's first black president, which was absolutely historic. And so, we began to see the brokenness in our system, and had a theory that, if it's just Republicans and Democrats can't get along. And what we found out really quickly is that our political divides were really merely a symptom of much, much deeper, foundational, historical, multi-generational challenges and areas of trauma and brokenness and terrorism. That's the foundation that we stand upon today. And so I think when we see riots in the streets, when we see shootings and killings, when we see wild levels of argument and such, we're standing upon generations of injustice, broken promises, and ignorance. I mean, that was my big thing. I came into this with generations of ignorance on many of these issues that are dividing our country. I really believe that I was born into a country where they have these founding documents that say all men are created equal. When those words were written, it did not mean all men. It mainly meant all white landowning men, which is all white landowning males, which is such a small percentage of the population at that time. And so, I just kind of assumed that, all men meant all men, women, every color and race. And so just learning these unique things about this country that I've been living in my whole life that I never knew was humbling and shocking.
Yeah, I'll just say, to add to that we didn't realize that our America was just one lived experience of many Americas that exist, and discovering that there are other Americas out there that, I liken it to being a fish swimming in water and discovering that I was wet, and that there were other people swimming in the water that made me healthy, and it was making them sick. And just realizing, oh wow, this was designed for me to thrive and for other people to not thrive, was a shocking revelation, because we do live siphoned off in our little bubbles. And our heart and goal and mission is to invite people on a journey out of their bubble and give them the opportunity to learn something from someone who's not like them, and to begin to break down and eliminate this fear factor that we have of the other, that is robbing us of unity and oneness, which actually has nothing to do with agreement. Unity and oneness has nothing to do with agreement. And I think the only way to discover that is to tiptoe outside your bubble and find somebody who thinks and acts and looks differently than you, and believes, has a different faith, a different tradition, a different culture, and begin to expand ourselves to realize that we really are part of one big whole human family. And not knowing that is a sad way to live.
Can I just jump in here and ask a question? I'm going to start with Mark, but it's sort of for everybody. So this film is calling for change in the way people think, change in the way people look at things. But Mark, you've worked in change for a long time. Sometimes change takes a long time, but sometimes change happens quickly. Where do you guys think we are along the change continuum? Do you think this message will resonate because of the trauma that this country has just endured within the last few months and years? Do you think change will be easier now than it might have been previously?
I wish I could say something really upbeat and positive, Judy, and kind of reassure you and everybody listening. But I think it's going to be a tough turnaround time. I don't think it's going to happen immediately. I think we're going to have a few more crises. Then I do feel I have some optimism. I do have some optimism once those crises have hit and we've responded to them. But I think they're going to have to be worse than what we're dealing with now. So that horrible line, things are going to get better before they worse. I think in terms of civility and polarization, that's the case. Certainly for the next 6 months. Certainly for the next 6 months. Now in 2021, is there a chance for a turnaround? Absolutely. But I think it really depends on what this movement that this film is a part of is doing. That if the movement really coheres, if it really becomes a kind of what I would like to call a third force, so that people realize, a couple of years ago, people, thought they had to just call Yellow Cab if they wanted to ride. And then several years ago, this thing called Uber happened, and suddenly people realized, oh, I have an option. I have another option. And then came Lyft and et cetera. And I think if this movement to reunite America becomes almost like a third option, like, hey, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, but I can, like Greg Orman was saying, I can think independently, I can move independently, I can behave independently, I can actually be a bridge. If that movement grows as a result of this crisis, then I become very optimistic. And that's why I'm excited about the film, because most Americans don't know that this flag exists. They know that the red Republican flag exists and the blue Democratic flag exists. And Greg was absolutely right, that as long as they think they only have two options, I'm not very optimistic about a change. But there's this film, I actually think can be the raising of that third flag. Stephen, what do you think? You're close to Washington. You're working with a lot of young representatives. What do you think of Judy's question? What's your thought?
Yeah, I sometimes say the best way to predict the future is to listen to the young leaders who are going to shape that future. And based on that read, I agree with you, Mark. And the trends are certainly somewhat troubling in the next 6 months, or maybe even perhaps the next couple of years. But Dr. King has this great line about when the night is darkest, then you can start to see the stars shine through. And I think in a crisis, a lot of reinvention can happen. And that's what we're starting to see from this younger generation of leaders who I have the privilege of interacting with on a regular basis. And the question I have in my mind is, how do you make this movement for reuniting the country, for powerful, empathetic bridge building, to truly catch fire, to reach the tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would say? And if there's any indication I have that there's the potential for that to happen, it's a lot of the speeches I used to give on college campuses before the pandemic, with a lot of students who are, by the way, the least partisan. So that should make Greg Orman happy about that. This younger generation coming up, they're the most independent generation in America, but they care more about issues than party. And what I see from that is an energy to try and transcend the old fault lines that we've had in prior generations, and to find new ways of doing things, more solutions that might not be left versus right, but rather, future versus the past. And the Uber kind of taxi example you mentioned, Mark, is a great example of that. One of the things I hear so often from students is when they hear this polarized media and all the divisive messaging, they just say, tell it to me straight. Why can't you just tell it to me straight? I want just the basic information, and I want to know who people are as human beings. And so that tells me that there's a latent hunger out there. And the question is, how do we provide those options? And then how do we make lightning strike on it so people can really see it?
I'll just jump in, but this is a good question to get a quick feedback from everyone on, is like, are we optimistic that their change is possible, that things, will turn around or they get worse? I think, just to give, my perspective on it, on this 2-year journey of learning about, different solutions to the problem, and that a lot of those solutions are inside of us, that it's not something you can point a finger at and say it's their fault, or it's, you know, the government's fault, or it's media's fault. Like, of course they have different incentives than us. The government, you know, is made up of two political parties that have incentives to win. And so that's really what it's about. It's not about serving people, it's about winning the next election. So that's immediately different than what our interest is, which is to move ahead and progress. And same with media. They're amplifying the most extreme, you know, wings and voices of the party. And so we're getting a distorted view of reality that might not actually reflect tens of millions of people that are somewhere in the middle of that political spectrum. And so for me, I'm actually very, even though this has been a challenging time, and probably this moment is the most challenging time in a generation, where we've had, you know, this kind of political unrest mixed with this public health emergency, with this economic crisis, and, you know, this racial injustice that's at the forefront of the conversation. This is like a stress on top of a stress on top of a stress, and it's forced all of us to like wake up and pay attention, and whichever side you're on, just to have some agency over the situation of your own life. And no political leader, no piece of news can allow you to be upended emotionally unless you allow it to. And so there's a certain amount of agency that we have in just how we talk to each other, like what we're posting online that's either fueling the fire or not. And we all have to make a decision. Are we dividers or are we reuniters? And that's something that to me gives a lot more hope and agency, which is, this isn't something you don't have control over. You have absolute control where you are with what you have. And so, I don't know, just briefly, Susan, Greg, and David, and then I think Judy would want to open it up for questions. Are you optimistic that things can turn around and get better? Susan, why don't you go first?
I would like to say that we have a chance to fix it sooner than later. I am an independent, and I mean truly an independent, not even aligned with the independent party. But in order to even vote in a primary, I had to align with a party, because I only have two real options. And past few elections, I have tried to vote independently, and so my vote was quote unquote wasted, which frustrates the heck out of me. So status quo is one of the hardest things to break out of. We are at a position where we are beginning to break out of that. I am so encouraged to hear what Stephen's project is doing. We're not going to make it by this November with maybe all the major changes that we want, but I am hopeful that we can at least talk to people. But the work really begins in November, no matter who wins.
Greg?
You know, I think it was Bill Gates who once said, we tend to overestimate the amount of change that's going to happen in 2 years and underestimate the amount of change that's going to happen in 10. And so I do think this, you know, I think both parties have used division to win elections. I don't think they're really interested in solving problems for the American people. I think the problem they're solving is, how do we get reelected? And so, you know, ultimately, you know, I do believe over time, however, we will start seeing progress. And I think that progress, we are starting to see it today. We're not seeing it in independent candidates get elected. We're not seeing it a whole lot in the actions and the behaviors of our elected leaders, notwithstanding some of the things that Stephen mentioned. But what we have seen recently is lots of people gravitate to political reforms that fundamentally alter electoral incentives in a way that ultimately would push, would reduce the power of extremists. So as an example, Maine passed ranked choice voting not once but twice, because they passed it in 2016. The legislature effectively repealed it, so they had to pass it again in 2018. And ironically, the Democrat who led the charge to repeal it was the biggest single beneficiary of it being implemented, because he lost the election on the first ballot, but won it because it was a ranked choice election. But we're starting to see progress like that. It's not just the Ohio redistricting. We've seen redistricting reforms in a number of places. We've seen open primaries now in a number of places. Colorado passed one recently. we're starting to see a lot of activity towards this idea that if we change the way we elect people, if we change the electoral incentives, we may ultimately open it up for more independents to run, because it would eliminate that spoiler argument, that wasted vote argument that Susan mentioned. And at the same time, it would give incentives to Democrats and Republicans to actually work across the aisle and try to appeal to a broader group of the electorate. So I think that's where change is going to come from. I'm skeptical that it's going to come necessarily from partisans putting down their swords and realizing our common humanity and having empathy for each other. I think it's much more likely to happen when we change electoral incentives in a way that creates more competition and provides incentives for people on both sides to elect more moderate candidates who are willing to work together.
That's great. David and Aaron, what do you guys think?
I think for me, I'm encouraged that the status quo that says, everything is going okay is beginning to break down. To take a rough quote from our friend Mark Gerzon on the phone here, on the call here, is, we're in a car called America, and this check engine light has been on. And for a lot of people, the car's never really been moving. But for many people in America like us, there's kind of maybe been a little light on, but you don't worry about it. Now the car's starting to smoke, starting to make knocking noises. There's some real problems. So it's causing a lot of people to pull over and to look in the mirror and look under the hood. And it's like, what is wrong here? The path we've been on is no longer working. We've got to do something. So I've been really encouraged lately by the fact that so many people are looking and learning. There's a level of humility in a lot of people that we've been interacting with, and curiosity that I haven't seen before.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think people are beginning to see one another for the first time. People are beginning to, from our background, like white, middle-class, conservative background, are waking up and saying, I think we might have a problem with race in America. And it's like, for a progressive liberal who may have known this for years and years, or for a person of color or a minority who's lived this, it's like, heck yeah, we have a problem. But one of the things we talk about is giving people permission to be where they are on their journey, and not using shame as the tool to get people to wake up. Because to speak to the change question, I think shame is predominantly what's being used to as the vehicle to get to change. And ultimately, I don't think shame will do that. I think love can bring transformation. And what we need more than change is transformation, I believe.
So I just want to take a moment here to step in and say to the audience, this will be a great time if you have questions to type them into the Q&A. We have about 15 more minutes, and I know there's a lot to talk about. This could go on for a very long time, but I'm hopeful it will go on as the film rolls out around the country. But one question, if I can ask, so we talk about reuniting in terms of the political world that we live in. What about beyond politics or outside of politics? What does reuniting mean? What does it look like, and how does it happen?
I think, Aaron, what you said earlier about unity doesn't necessarily mean agreement is something that's really important distinction to make. The American creed is live and let live. You don't have to agree with someone in order to have a mutual respect for their rights. And this idea that reunification or reuniting means like coming together and putting aside our differences is a myth. It's like that is too much to ask and highly unlikely. I think Mark, you talk about this a lot, that you can still have very strong beliefs and advocate them very passionately, but still be a bridge builder. And so I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. And we don't even necessarily have to like each other. I mean, it would be great if we did, but you have to respect each other and each other's rights. So Mark, I guess, what does that mean to you? Like,
well, the scene that comes back to me based on Judy's question was the scene in the film between Aaron and the African-American woman who lost her baby. And I have no idea whether Aaron and that woman you know, I have no idea whether they agree on politics or policies, but watching Erin open her heart and watching that woman open her heart, that to me was music. That to me was magic. And the other scene where, you know, where Susan is telling David Leverton about how she felt about his work in politics. I mean, during the course of that dinner, that their hearts open. And I think that's, I just want to tie this, that, you know, people might think, oh, that's an awfully soft comment about opening hearts. But Judy, your question was about beyond politics. And I think we all know from our personal lives whether our heart's open or not. I know it with my kids or my wife or even my dog. Is my heart open or is my heart closed? And I think it relates to Greg's structural question about two parties. That I think two parties, by their very nature, unless somebody can do a major transformation of their attitudes and their two-party structure is by nature a closed heart structure. They close their hearts to each other, and they make Americans close their hearts to half their neighbors. And so for me, the answer that comes to me, Judy, is the film is really the relevance to it that goes beyond politics. It's inviting the viewer to open our hearts. And can we open our hearts to each other? And if not, what are we afraid of? And are we willing to do that work the way the Levertons did? Are we willing to do that work of our closed hearts and really let them open? You know, that's the hardest work there is.
I actually would say I think that's the big challenge, because, you know, there's an old adage that it's hard to hate up close. Unfortunately, today, we don't have that many opportunities to be close to people who think differently than we do. In fact, you know, there's a book out by a guy named Bill something or other called The Great Sort. We now live next to people who think, act, and vote like we do. And as a result of that, we have very little opportunity, like the Levertons did, to really see people who are different from us and recognize our common humanity and the things that we have in common, and the fact that they're so much stronger than the things that divide us. We get to live our lives now in rooms on social media where it's very easy to hate, and we really rarely get that opportunity anymore. In fact, one example of that, in 2012, I had someone come to me and say that he wanted to bet me dinner at a fancy restaurant with our wives that Mitt Romney would beat Barack Obama by 7 points in the popular vote. And I told him I'd be more than happy to take that bet, but tell me why. And he said, Greg, because everybody I talk to, everybody I run into, everybody I know is voting for Mitt Romney. And I said, that just tells me a whole lot more about who you spend your time with than anything. And so I think that's the challenge with the open-hearted approach, is we just don't have that opportunity. And people don't take the opportunity anymore to sort of meet face to face and recognize our common humanity.
We do actually have a question in the Q&A, unless anyone else wants to address that issue, or we can address it later. Stephen, has your organization felt any resistance from either party about the work that you're doing?
Oh, absolutely, but it's in more subtle ways than you would expect. I think no one would publicly, in a full-throated way, whether it's press release or TV or some other medium, say that we're against millennials uniting across party lines. I don't think that's a political winner from a public standpoint, but there's a lot that happens behind the scenes. And I'll give an example. Here in Wisconsin, our group here is working on expanding electric vehicle infrastructure as part of a clean energy solution. And both party leaders, the Republican speaker, who really runs the Republican Party here, and then the Democratic governor, neither was happy with it and did things behind the scenes to try and disrupt that effort. I heard stories about the Republican speaker who is not happy that some of our Republican members were talking with Democrats, including some vulnerable Democrats, and took some of them aside and said, hey, we don't want you having those conversations. And then on the flip side, some of the Democratic establishment was saying that electric vehicles are for elites and we don't support that, and almost trying to make an anti-clean energy argument. And it gets to this point of, if one side proposes an idea, then we have to contort ourselves to automatically be against it, even if we actually agree on the idea substantively. And of course, both of our, our leaders in the state who are part of Millennial Action Project, in a more eloquent way said, that's dumb, like we shouldn't be doing that. And said that actually we should support clean energy solutions. And I remember at one of our, we had this series called Red and Blue Dialogues, and I asked the Republican co-chair who helped to lead that bill, I asked, how do you respond in your own caucus when members are saying, why are you working on the environment? And he said, I ran for office to work on issues that I care about, and that means trying to change the attitudes around me. And that really reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from Dr. King. He says, a genuine leader is not a searcher of consensus, but a molder of consensus. And when we get this opposition behind the scenes, we do our best to overcome that.
So we do have about 8 more minutes. I don't know if anyone wanted to talk about the prior question that I asked, or sort of thoughts about what you're going to do when this film comes out. How are you going to be involved? How are you going to support the conversation? Are you going to change the way that you're doing your work at all as a result of this film?
Yeah, I guess like just to talk to that, like I think part of the problem is that there's not an awareness that there is this movement, that there is a transpartisan movement or bridge building movement that you can be a part of, and there's so many different ways to do it. And part of the reason that we wanted to follow multiple storylines was to show that there's no like one solution. This is like a mountain that we're all trying to climb, and whether you take this path or that, it all arrives at the same place of this deeper understanding of each other and ourselves. And so, we really hope that the film could be an invitation to the conversation and an on-ramp to any number of organizations or solutions in your own life. There's do's and don'ts in certain conversations. There's, a lot of like research done on moral values that conservatives have and that liberals have, and what speaks to, us differently in our moral makeup, that we're completely talking past each other, trying to reinforce our own point of view instead of reframing it into the values of someone else. And there's just so many things that like we're all walking around unaware of and feeling frustrated. And so for me, like the work that everyone's doing here is indicative of hopefully the kind of work that we all need to do, which is, stop blaming other people and maybe get out of our bubble, not just geographically, but our media bubble, and like what we're consuming, and read different sides of the news, or take a break from the news if it's really giving you high anxiety. I mean, there's so many like daily solutions that can happen right now. And so I guess like, to bring David and Aaron and Susan back into it, what did you guys, this kind of idea of, you can legislate all you want, but it's really a heart movement, is one of the lines that you say, Susan. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like how it's not just about policy, it's about, each of our role in this?
Well, I even said at the funeral that I believe there are more good people than bad. And I believe that in our hearts, we want to do the right thing. There are bad players always, but there always have been. I still say there are more good people than bad. And unfortunately, you didn't get to show the dinner conversation that the Levertons and I had after, I blew off steam a little. Because we had a very pleasant evening. We came to a place of understanding and moved beyond it, and had a lot in common, a lot that we were both learning. And I think that brain just went, ask the question again, Ben, did I cover it?
Yeah, no, that was great. I mean, that scene in particular that you brought up, like, that even people that have a desire to bridge our divisions, even coming together, can have conflicts. And that's sort of goes back to this is difficult work. That we're not saying this is easy. This is incredibly challenging work. And maybe, I don't know, David and Aaron, if you want to weigh in on that, just the kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and the just blind spots along the journey that we all have. Anything come to mind?
Watching the film, I think, gave me a lot of hope, because going on our trip, and then finishing our trip and sort of just going back into a little bit of believing the lie that there's no hope, because that message is so palpable from the media of hopelessness. Watching the film, like I hope so many people get to see this movie, because it is such a hopeful film, and it is proof that there is a third way, that there is another, that we don't have these binary choices, that those are artificial and made up, and that we get to transverse those and see how our lives bleed into one another in all these beautiful ways. Our humanity is what connects us, not our political agreements. And I believe that when we find the humanity in our political opponents, that will kind of self-correct our political division if it happens on a mass scale. I mean, what we need right now is a heart connection. I mean, I know that sounds cheesy, kind of like what Mark said, like we need to have an open heart, but it's true. There's no other way.
So I just want to, sorry, David, if you were going to speak.
No, you're good.
I just wanted to let the audience know that everyone on the panel has generously agreed to provide their contact information. So the email addresses are in the chat, and I know that they're open to hearing from you after the film, but there is sort of one last question, two questions. I'm going to collapse them into one. How can this film get in public schools, and are there ways to reach younger people? And Ben, do you think this conversation can crystallize into a movement with chapters in major cities?
I hope so. I mean, the first question, how does it get, into schools and in front of people? We're working on our distribution plans right now, and, we're in front of all the major streaming platforms, and very hopeful that one of them will take it, and we'll be able to release just after the election. And then we have an impact campaign that is more specifically targeted outreach to different groups that might, benefit from seeing it or want to see it. And, we really wanted to make the film very emotional and visceral and kind of steer away from the more academic, so that it could do that. The way to change minds is through moving people's hearts. And so hopefully there's a self-reflection that happens. I think part of the challenge has been, that middle of the road is what people view as bridge building sometimes is, soft or conflict averse, or, doesn't get the kind of media attention because it's not clickbait. But to me, the transformation is incredibly dramatic. And the fact that you can be one person and then, go through this self-awareness and transformation into someone else through interaction, not just through conversation, but through life experience is very dramatic and commanding of attention. And so it's really important to spotlight these type of stories and, to hear some good news every now and again. Unfortunately, all we hear is bad news because that's what gets us paying attention. And so I think a lot of it is on us to seek these things out, and hopefully the film can just be like the beginning of a journey for someone.
And on that note, I'm going to say thank you to everybody. I mean, thank you for participating. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for making the film, Ben. We're, again, so thrilled that we're able to launch this. And you can see it for 2 more days on the streaming platform through Monday evening. Please remember to vote, and we will see everybody at the 30th Woods Hole Film Festival next summer. Thank you so much, all.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you guys for joining, spending part of your Saturday with us. Thanks, Judy. And thank you guys, everyone here on the panel with us.
Great. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.